Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Uh, Today, we're going to talk about igniting your journey to the cloud and streamlining the transition from VMware. And this webinar today is done in conjunction with both Coretek and Nerdio. I'm Ryan Hinkleman, Senior Solution Architect here at Coretek Services. Juan, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you. My name is Juan Torres. I'm one of the senior sales engineers here at Nerdio, and very nice to meet everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to kind of talk to the state of the market, something I think if you are here, you're probably painfully aware of. We'll talk about kind of the migration approaches that we take here at Coretek and that Nerdio takes, and some of the considerations in trying to truly adopt into the cloud and do so effectively from any existing strategies you might have. We'll talk about some of the specific Nerdio capabilities that both accelerate some of those adoption strategies as well as provide some ongoing value from an operational and FinOps perspective. And then we'll talk about how we can further accelerate through some offers we have together into production with Coretek and Nerdio. So with that, I think we'll get started. So EUC disruption in 2024. So everybody is mostly aware at this point that at the end of 2023 last year, Broadcom bought VMware and a little bit of chaos has ensued. Um, from the hypervisor layer, we understand that there's maybe some key changes and shifts in the market because of some increased costs through that acquisition. And then in turn, some of the EUC components were then sold yet again and has been branded Omnissa. And that has led to just quite the shakeup. Obviously, the acquisition created risk in and of itself. And it is owned by a PE firm that his reputation is to create profitability and sell. So by all accounts, that acquisition risk is not over quite yet. A lot of the subscription costs have gone up or there's uncertainty around them. And that's both at the EUC layer, but just as importantly, and maybe more dramatically, at the hypervisor layer in which that solution runs on. There's been widespread concerns around the supportability of the solution as some of the shakeup has ensued. And now we have real pressure on our teams because of looming contract renewal dates. Everybody understands that there's likely a compelling reason to switch technologies just based on the finances alone, not to mention some of the superior benefits, but we're doing so under the gun, if you will, of trying to meet the timelines for those ELA refreshes and renegotiations. So there is a finite amount of time to be able to make sure that any switch we do can come in under that wire and we can be production confidently so that we can avoid some renewal costs and some excessive price increases. I'm imagining that a lot of this sounds very familiar to a lot of you at this point. So how do we mitigate some of that risk, right? And I think the obvious statement is, by and large, we're going to move and we're going to move to AVD with Nerdio, but we need to have an approach that really is thoughtful throughout. We need a method, right? We need a method to assess the technology. What are we delivering? What are the applications? Who are the use cases? And making sure that we're always thinking of user experience first and foremost. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. The technology. We need proven technologies that can help us accelerate deployments and be able to really get down a path of not just a POC, but production and ongoing deployments as quickly as possible. Again, knowing that we have such a compelling event just over the horizon. So we need to be able to speed our deployment time. We need to be able to create and manage images in an effective manner. We need to be able to provide some of the administrative functionality that our teams may be used to. Um, and we need to be able to provide cost optimizations because this may be our first leap into the cloud. And regardless, it's one that we need to tightly manage because of the resources they are. And because of the variability of our users, we certainly want to be able to match their usage with the appropriate capability, but no more, because we don't want to effectively waste that resource and that consumption and money. And we need a specific output, right? We need to do this with the mentality that we've got to gear towards that initial production pilot, which will validate all of those key metrics that we need from a go forward and move us quickly into scale and migration. Um, Doing so and doing it from a proof of concept perspective and doing it without the mentality of scale and continuous onboarding behind it will set the overall timeline back, not prove what it needs to prove, and delay the adoption that would be so meaningful potentially to you as a customer going forward, because that again is going to have direct impact on some of the uh, reliance that you have and therefore the contracts that you need to sign in the future. So with that, get my slide forward here. With that, I'm going to bring on Juan and we'll kind of talk about what that migration overview is here together and then work into some of the facets where Nerdio can help us along.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah. So this slide in particular is really trying to kind of give you an understanding of what a migration essentially is made up of and sort of the time frames that we're seeing. This was something we did internally where we just spoke to a lot of our different customers and really understood what they were going through just in general, right? When they go to try and migrate from an on-premises environment onto Azure and potentially AVD, what does that look like, right? And what is that time frame? And so in general, we found, anyone within about 1,000 users or less, it was taking them a few months to kind of get migrated over. Anywhere between 1,000 to 8,000 was about double that time frame, and then any of the larger, it could be, it's 12 months or greater. And Ryan, I'd question, you guys do this certainly more than we do. And does this time frame look accurate, or what do you think?
It absolutely does. And I think, some of the methodology we talked about certainly shrink that. And part of it is going to be dependent upon, number of varied workloads, who are our users, and how many use cases do we ultimately have. But by and large accurate, right? And we try to drive that down as small as possible through um, driving as much simplicity through the stack as we can.
Yeah, and ideally, it kind of breaks down into four buckets. You've obviously got to prepare the Azure environment before you can move anything on there. You need to have something there in place, and that's where Coretek comes in, and they can help build that out. Right, Nerdio itself, while it is a great tool to deploy certain components, it doesn't build the landing zone for you. Right, it sort of just picks up from there and sort of facilitates some of the other pieces. But then you have to create the resources, right? And that's kind of Nerdio's, with the help of Coretek, of course, kind of builds out that AVD resource, right? And you'll see later on in some of the slides, we can give you visibility into how things are operating, and then you can make adjustments from there. But you sort of need a starting point, right? And that's where the Coretek expertise will come in. They'll be able to say, hey, look, based on what you have on premises, this is what will work in Azure, and then you sort of go from there. And then you've got obviously your pilot group, so that the users who are going to be testing, and then ideally once you've done your testing phase, you can finally start migrating users and then sort of moving on from there. And then if we want to look at that next slide, yep. So more specifically, right, these are sort of the components where you need to have in place, right? You've got to prepare your identities, right? Whether you're going to continue to do, on-prem AD, or you're going to do something like Entra ID alongside it, or, Entra ID by itself, or Entra ID domain services, right? Those are all things you need to have in place, the Azure subscriptions, et cetera. But Ryan, you guys probably do this way often than we do. So any kind of thoughts there?
Yeah, so certainly, and some of our customers, they already do have a mature landing zone set with a transit, um, with a transit VNet set up and are already connected, and this might be their second, their fourth, their 10th workload. Others will be going fresh, and for those, there's a well-adopted framework that we largely follow from Microsoft to yield that architecture that not only works for Azure Virtual Desktop with Nerdio, but for any and all workloads. And it's truly made to be kind of a living document, a living topology, and assimilate not only this workload, but other workloads effectively in the future as you grow. So, and that's something that we do regularly, both for Azure Virtual Desktop and people that are just customers that are just on a larger cloud journey.
Awesome. Yeah, so then the next slide would be, or the creating the resources themselves, right? And here's a kind of a combination of Coretek and Nerdio, and what you'll see is Nerdio will facilitate how you want to deliver these things, how you want to create them, your image management, the storage accounts themselves, right? The the testing of the host pools, right? And really just getting you through that part of the migration process and onto your pilot group. But ideally, again, you have to have something in place. But once you have that in place, we sort of pick up the ball and kind of run with it. And then we give you information about how to continually make adjustments as the environment continues to grow and evolve. The data is there evolving with it and sort of giving you information about what changes you need to make in order to keep things running in tip top shape.
Yeah, one of the things we've done is kind of standardized um, some of our design formats. Of course, they'll accommodate for varied workloads and sizes and scale. But we've really tried to make that a standard approach to how we do these so that our design documents outputs directly become inputs to these various pieces, right? The applications, the host pool options, so that we can quickly utilize Nerdio to stamp out the environment and then start working on the real value add, which is the use cases, right? So the OS, the applications, the experience.
Yep. And from an application delivery standpoint, right? So this is a great opportunity for you to sort of look at all your overarching applications and then understand, what kind of challenges you may face in order if you're going to move your applications from an on-premises deployment into Azure. So, for example, the first thing you'd want to do is obviously we'd want to list the applications and then understand, are these applications communicating back to a database? Where is that database gonna live? Does it make sense to continue to have, say, if you move an application to Azure, does it make sense to have that application communicate back down to an on-prem SQL database? Is the performance going to be there, right? Those are kind of the things that Coretech is going to help, so that you don't have to sort of figure it out after the fact. Does it make sense to move these applications and things like that? Are these applications all utilized? A little bit of my background. I came from Citrix. I spent about 10 years there, and one of the common things that I noticed was, people sort of just was very reactive to applications. They would just install apps, install apps, install apps. And we found very often that a lot of the applications weren't even used anymore, but they were still part of the image. They were still being updated. And so this is an opportunity for you to revisit that. Does it make sense to continue to use these? If so, can we get rid of some? And does the delivery method still make sense, right? Nerdio introduces a lot of different delivery options. Does it make sense to continue to present this application in the same way that it does? And so if you can just advance the slides here, you'll see that some of the delivery methods, obviously the tried and true of baking your applications to the image is still there. That's always going to be a thing. But Nerdio has the ability to allow you to install applications on a VM after the VM has been created, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the point of that is you can potentially reduce the amount of images that you have because you can have, say, one or two general images, and then you can push applications to the VMs after they've been created.
Yeah.
You'll have, or go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's awesome, and we do that all the time. And I think, when you look at like app attach, that's that model, right? Push it after the fact to help customize it for the user experience of that given user. And I think one of the other ones that we found extraordinarily helpful is, even though the app may be directly baked into the image, that first option, we'll use app masking with FS Logics, which is a standard part of most of these installs for profile management. A lesser known feature is that masking function, which can actually take that app, even though it might be on the image, and hide it from a given set of users as well. So you kind of have both methodologies to be able to truly customize user experience, and give a widely varied set of apps, and still have kind of a very standard image set, uh, kind of below the line, just away from the customer or from the end user's purview. So really helpful.
Yep. Yeah, I think what you'll find is you're going to have a lot of options, right? And so it really can leverage just about anyone's environment, how you want to present your applications or your desktops. You'll find that Nerdio is going to provide you with a lot of different options.
Absolutely.
So more specifically around the catalog. So this is a little bit into the console now. So Nerdio, talking about applications, uh, because you could potentially have applications being delivered from a lot of different ways. Nerdio has a catalog where it takes all of the applications, regardless of how you're presenting them to the images and by extension to your users, uh, and you can manage them all from one single location, right? So you can deploy them again. You can sort of just manage them, understand what applications are being presented and to who, what host pools, etc. And it's really just streamlines and facilitates the management of those applications, especially if you do decide, hey, we want to leverage multiple mechanisms for delivery. You don't have to jump through hoops to like understand where they are and how you want to manage them moving forward.
So Juan, I see here that like Winget is your repository for the applications you've listed here, and it's unified. Can you tell us about some of the other sources you can pull into this unified catalog?
Sure. So we have SCCM integration. Again, you touched a little bit on the app attach, so MSIX app attach or app attach v2. Um, Things like Intune, so being able to provision applications out through Intune as well. So you can actually pull Nerdio, or I should say Intune into Nerdio, and leverage a lot of those capabilities amongst some other added features, all within there. And this will populate this catalog.
Awesome. And so we then, as uh, creators of that image and therefore that experience, can really leverage wherever the customer is with whatever technology or technologies that they have available that are delivering their apps today.
And one of the benefits to having the catalog is that you can then create what we call deployment policies. So in Nerdio, you have the ability to create a policy that is really just made up of individual applications that you then intend to install or push out to a host pool. So you could say, look, I've got these contract users, right? They need, Adobe, they need Teams, they need these specific proprietary applications. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to create a policy that installs these applications on the VMs that I'm going to give to them, and then I'm able to then manage the different host pools much easier, the different makeups of applications, and you can potentially create as many policies as you want. But ideally, we find they're typically for different use cases, internally, externally, or whatever it might be. But again, just really you could see here like the makeup of the different applications and things like that, and how many host pools you're positioning them to, and etc.
Perfect.
And then as the kind of the last loop to draw full circle around it is understanding what the status of that deployment was, right? I used to be a sysadmin, so I always like these specific features, and it's great. I can create a deployment policy, I can push it out, but I need to know if it actually worked, because if not, I'm going to get some users that are going to reach out and let me know, hey, things are missing, and so we have a deployment status, and I specifically left this error one there so you could see where it tells you, hey, look, this failed And there's actually some logging that you can look at that will then further tell you, hey, here's the application specifically that failed, potentially why it failed. You can from there sort of go a couple different ways. You could try to rerun it. You could go in there and find out more specifically why. You can find other mechanisms for pushing the application out temporarily. If it's like a multi-user host pool or something like that, you can say, let me just turn this VM off, right? Let me turn on another machine instead while I troubleshoot this one, right? You're able to be as proactive as you can be when it comes to the status of these different images and host pools and session hosts.
Awesome.
Cool. And then now we're getting into just some generalization information. This is more for anyone who's new to Azure, right? Doesn't understand like potentially what host pools are. So again, I came from Citrix, so I just used it as an example. So host pools are really just machine catalogs and delivery groups essentially combined. So for any of the Citrix users out there, right? So this is just the host pool is just where the VMs are, right? The kind of the container of where all the machines are, and then who has access to them. And then AVD, of course, in general, gives you the ability to do Windows 10, Windows 11 multi-user. So you can put multiple users on a single VM, similar to probably how if you're on-prem today, you have your RDS environment, right? And you can present your users with desktops or apps.
Yeah, I would say
AVD,
we're probably seeing, much more Windows 11 now than 10 for sure,
yeah.
but the multi-session is critical, right?
Yeah, I should probably update this slide so that since the Windows 10 is going into life soon. But and then you have the option to do dedicated desktops, whether pooled or static, right? So that's your kind of your one-to-ones. You could do multiple users in a single one. You could have them all run off a single image, or you could have them just be static, right? As it similar to your one-to-ones, right? And
Absolutely.
then Nerdio provides you with scaling options for either. So and for us, the scaling options are just how we turn machines on and off, like the criteria for turning things on and off. And so Nerdio has specific ones for each one of those pool types.
I
Uh,
think we're going to
and
talk about that here in a few slides, right? And some of the fantastic capabilities that entails.
yep, yep. And
So,
and then, or go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, after you.
Yeah, so in general, just some general, and then Ryan probably could tell you better than I could, as they do this more often than we do. But obviously, you want to leverage multi-user where possible. This will typically lead to the most cost savings when it comes to consumption. Uh, FS Logics is your roaming profiles, and Ryan talked about this with the app masking, right, which is one of the really good features as well of leveraging FS Logics. And then from an application settings and session limits, so obviously if you use GPOs today for these things, you can continue to do so. But Nerdio also has the same options to do this within our software. So if you don't want to leverage those GPOs, or you're doing something like Entra ID, you can let Nerdio control the session time limits and things like that. And last but not least would be like that Azure Capacity Extender. So this is a really good feature where, you know, in Azure, there's going to be some times where there's limited capacity, right? Everyone is essentially pulling from the same resources, and rarely, but it does happen, will a particular location just run out of resources. And what Nerdia does is it identifies that a particular location is out of resources, and you can tell it, hey, if this machine is unavailable, give me these other machines instead, right? And it'll be, you can tell it to be the same cost, the same CPU, the same RAM. But ideally, what this does for you is it keeps you going, because without this, you run out of capacity, you just run out of capacity. You have to go in there and manually tell it to choose a new option and sort of build things up. Nerdio will identify and just say, hey, I'm on automatically going to just use this other alternate VM instead. And again, you're just keep running, right? Business as usual. You may not even realize it. And at a later time, when that original machine is available, it will go back to that machine when it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, that's really awesome, right? Because it's our responsibility to make sure we're giving those VMs back when we're not using them, and that's how we recoup some of the cost. But then in turn, And by nature of the shared cloud model, right? Somebody else might use those in the meantime. So having a means to just be dynamic around that is awesome. And of course, the multi-user, just if fitting the number of users on there, it's dramatically less typically. We want to make sure that the users will be successful and have a great experience, and that's partly going to be behavior driven and partly application driven. But where we can, that has been and will continue to be the most favored option from an administrative delivery perspective. One other concept I would say here that's kind of, I think, fundamental to just hit and mention at a high level is image management isn't what it was classically, right? You used to build an image, um, remediate it, version it, and then as you operationalized it, continue to do so, version it up and up and up with all of the patches. And I think now it's really about checking out that fresh gallery image every time you want to rebuild and being able to then use those packages in that unified catalog to be able to then effectively recreate and iterate your images moving forward. And you get, all of the benefits of doing so from a fresh image and all of its capabilities, but you still get the repeatability going forward, just conceptually.
Yep. So I guess a couple other capabilities. Nerdio has quite a bit, but some of the more streamlined ones that we like to talk about will be the stopped OS disk swapping. So this is where Nerdio has the ability to change the billing mechanism of a machine's storage. So you can provision premium SSD. You're going to get that performance when the VMs are on, and when you turn them off, or when Nerdio turns them off in this case, we actually change it to say something like hard disk drive performance, and the cost is reduced typically down to a third of the total cost. The VM is off, the performance doesn't matter, and when the VM gets turned back on, we change it back to the premium SSD, right? So you've got the performance where you want it and the savings when you need it. On-demand provisioning is a really cool option as well. Some of our customers want to build machines daily or weekly or whatever it might be, so they can, build machines. Nerdio can actually build machines as it sees that it's running low. So let's say you have 10 machines in your pool, and everyone went home, and so now all of a sudden more people are logging in than they normally would. Nerdio will actually go and build these machines proactively, so that the users always have resources available for them. Uh, we have an alternate scaling option as well. So being able to have your kind of Monday through Friday, as an example, options for how you want to turn things on and off, and then provide an alternate, say the weekend or holidays, where you can say, hey, don't turn nearly as much things on, or let's be more aggressive about turning machines off because it's the weekend and we expect only there to be a handful of people, if anyone at all, right? We also add CPU and RAM load balancing. So you could be more performance-based load balancing. So you can say, look, I just want you to fit as many people as you can on each one of these machines. But I want you to take a look at CPU and RAM, and you can set some guardrails and say, hey, never exceed 80% as an example, right? But if you fall below 60%, there's obviously some room there. Let's start turning machines off, right? So just being able to load balance beyond more than just 9 to 5 as an example. We can pre-stage host. This just means we can turn machines on at a specific time with expecting the users to log in, right? So if we know the bulk of our users log in at 6 a.m., we can have those machines up and running. That way everyone can hit the ground running. No one's waiting for any resources to get turned on. One of my personal favorite features is auto heal broken hosts. So again, this is where Nerdio can proactively repair machines that can be problematic, right? If a machine is in an unresponsive state, or it cannot accept incoming connections, it may not be aware of that. You may get an error, right? Users might still be routed to these machines, but the machine is not in a state where it can accept the connection, and so they would get an error. They would reach out to me, and I would have to go in and troubleshoot. What Nerdio does is it is monitoring for those different errors, and then it will take recovery actions. So you could restart the AVD agent, you could restart the whole VM, you could even delete the VM and recreate it from a base image if you wanted to. So I don't have to tell you, that's going to reduce the amount of tickets or just troubleshooting that is required. And then Nerdio has historical data and reserved instance analytics, and we actually added just general analytics as well, which I'll talk about in a second. But you're able to historically go back and just see how the sessions have been performing, the host pools have been going, when users are logging in, when they're logging out, and the reserved instance analytics is saying, hey, look, we are seeing that your machines are running so much that it would make sense for you to actually purchase reserved instances alongside letting Nerdio turn things on and off, adding to the overall reduction of costs. And then we're actually going to talk about this next, I believe, but it's the ongoing right sizing and reporting. So Nerdio is going to, again, continually feed you data on how to continue to optimize the environment. So speaking of optimizing the environment, so we've recently, well, it's been a little bit now, but we've added the ability for you to look at the user density as it pertains to like the last 7 days, right? So that's what this graph on the right hand side is trying to show. So each individual color means something, right? It can in all of the little kind of black bars are the users themselves, and where the bar turns red is where there are more users trying to log in than you have available machines. And so if you notice on the right hand side, you've got these sort of empty orange boxes, and then it kind of starts to scale down and goes green. What this data is trying to show you is that there are changes you need to make to the Nerdio scaling plans to accommodate users. So where you see the bar turning red, that means that you did not have enough machines for the users, and they ended up having to wait, or they were never able to connect, right? And so now you can go back and say, great, I know that I need an additional 5 machines at 3 a.m. as an example, right? And so you then go and make those changes, and now those users won't be able to wait. And on the right hand side where you see the orange, that's what we call high provisioning. So that means you have 15 machines running at a time where no one is even trying to log in. So you're just bleeding out money, right? So there you could reduce it down to even as little as 1 machine if you wanted to just have something on standby. And the cost reduction of having 14 less machines is obviously, I don't have to tell you, will be significant, right? And so this is one of my favorite features. It is just constantly going to tell you, right? And
Right. This is actually one of the biggest like ROIs for Nerdio in and of itself. I mean, once you can see and you have the tool set and can scale it appropriately to as near perfectly as possible match that usage curve and start to calculate some savings. I mean, this is huge. This is the killer feature.
yep. And one thing I'll mention too as well is, if you think about just in general, right? Like you're constantly adding users, adding host pools. You might acquire a company, you might build out a new team, and they live out of a different, a different time zone. It's really difficult to understand when they're trying to log in and out, and so you could essentially just pull in the companies, create the different host pools, different time zones, and you're gonna see exactly when those users are logging in, and you're able to just accommodate all the time rather than sort of being reactive. Like, hey, we pulled in this group. They're saying, hey, we're we had issues logging in. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, my time. It's really hard for me to get on there and try to find data. You just log in the next day. You see when they're trying to log in, and then you're able to make those adjustments right away. Cool. Then you have the VM right sizing. So this is another opportunity to either improve your user experience or reduce just the overall cost of your consumption, right? So what Nerdio does here is it looks at the VM size that you've given your users and against what they're actually utilizing. So for example, in the screenshot here in the middle, you could see that we've provisioned a 4 vCPU, 16 gigs of RAM VM, but the user is barely using the CPU. It's clocked at 1%, and they're using 14% RAM. So obviously they're probably browser based, right? They're doing a lot more RAM intensive things than CPU. And so you could, with this data, you could do a couple things, right? Nerdio is telling you, hey, look, you can actually go down to a 2V CPU and 8 gigs of RAM, and the user would still have a positive experience, and you're going to save $62 a month. Or you, if this is a multi-user host pool, you could use this data to say, look, I can actually likely increase the amount of user density on this particular VM, and you could do it maybe a little bit conservative, right? Maybe 1 or 2 users at a time, and then again revisit this. How are we looking? Looks good, and again continually make changes. Or it could be the opposite of that. They might be at 89% CPU and RAM, right? And so you're like, hey, more than likely, if I even add one additional user or I introduce an additional application, this might put me in a position where now the user is going to have performance issues. So again,
Yeah.
being as proactive as you can be.
I love that the slide's title is continual because this is truly an operational task, right? This is not something you set at the beginning when you define your host pools and forget about. Um, it's just a part of administrative function now to always be optimizing for both cost and performance, right? And these are the tools that really bring that to the forefront, so you can do that over time, as you point out, as user loads change, as applications change, as needs change at the business. You're there to always make sure that we're um, doing so in a responsible way, both to our user base and as well as to our wallets and to our budgets.
Perfect. So on to the last couple of Nerdio specific content, and it's around desktop images. So Ryan made a really good point earlier about, being able to take an image from the marketplace that has already been updated from Microsoft, and then using the policies to add applications after the fact, and that's perfect for those that kind of want like that traditional. Hey, I just want my own image, and I want to keep customizing that image moving forward. Nerdio reintroduces that as well as an alternative to just native AVD, right? So Nerdio can take and anything if you're already an AVD, or you do an AVD pilot and you have something on there, Nerdio can ingest all of that non-disruptively, and we can duplicate any of the machines you might have and use it essentially as our what we would call a master image, or you can create them from the Azure Marketplace. And what we do here is we are allowing you to have that similar, Horizon Citrix type of feel when it comes to image management. It's not quite the same because just the underlying technology on the back end is just slightly different. But the main concept of I've got this machine, I'm going to log into it, I'm going to do my changes, and then I'm going to update my host pool based on this particular machine is reintroduced, and it's the same concept, right? In in native AVD, you create the machine, and when you capture that image, you essentially lose that VM. So every time you want to make those changes or any updates, you have to build the machine again, wait for it to be provisioned, then log into it, make your changes, and then you lose the machine again. Here, Nerdio keeps that machine indefinitely because what we do is, as part of that process, is we clone the VM and the storage, and the machine that essentially disappears is actually just a duplicate of the original. And so you can always have that, forever golden image and continually update and have that versioning that Ryan talked about as well, where you can have multiple versions and you can revert back to previous versions if you needed to and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. And this is really just showing you kind of what the creation process looks like. So one of the things that I would say is noteworthy here is towards the bottom, there's a geographic distribution in Azure Compute Gallery. It's the second off button. What this allows you to do is it allows you to take this image and put it into a compute gallery, and you can replicate that image across multiple regions, Azure regions. So if you're intending to do DR, or you're going to have different users logging into different regions because of maybe the location of where they are, you don't have to do the work multiple times. You could do your customizations once, you can then have Nerdio duplicate that image into another region, and you'll have that image available in that region for you to then create and manage. So the image capture, we actually touched a little bit on this already, but the Nerdio's image capture process, this is where we would take that VM and duplicate it, duplicate the storage. We run sysprep on the copy, and we capture that image. So the point here is we're not running sysprep on your source VM, and so you'll always have that machine available for you, which is really great. And then last but not least is automated Windows updates. So one of the things that Nerdio allows you to do is you can run a series of scripts. There's a ton of different scripts that Nerdio introduces. And you also, if you're big into scripting, can add your own scripts and leverage Nerdio's capabilities to push them out as well. But here, specifically around Windows updates, is we have a script that will turn your machine on, your master image, will turn your master image on. It will run Windows updates for you, and then it will you can repeat this. So you could do, in this example on the bottom there, you can see it says monthly after patch Tuesday 1 day. So 1 day after patch Tuesday, the VM is turned on, the master image is turned on, we run Windows updates, and then the image is ready to go, right? You would then set a separate schedule to update your host pool based on that particular image. And now you have this cyclical kind of Windows updates that you don't have to worry about anymore. You can choose different parameters for how and when you want to update the host pool. You can do it during the day and drain machines slowly and naturally. If you're fortunate enough to have a maintenance window, you could do it during a maintenance window, right? Again, there's nothing but options on how you can sort of update this.
Awesome. So I think we've seen kind of clearly how Nerdio can benefit any move in technology to Azure Virtual Desktop, and really accelerate that. And I think we want to talk a little bit about how Nerdio and Coretek can do that in partnership to really leverage some of those key technology pieces. Um, so effectively, we really are looking to help bypass some of the risks and kind of some of the things we talked about as far as the processes of identifying use cases, the applications, and being able to make some of those assessments, um, formulate them correctly, and make sure that all of the functionality is there underneath as well. So we want to make sure that we're getting that production image and the apps in your tenant in a production mindset kind of way. um, we want to be able to conduct some modern best practice image deployment and maintenance strategies that we talked about. We want to make sure that we're using some of the tools that we just displayed here from a right sizing perspective, from a scaling policy perspective, to make sure that we're cost optimizing it from day one. Again, acknowledging full well that that is a continuous process after the fact, but we'll have the tools at the ready to be able to continue to monitor and react to that, and make sure that we're putting it through its paces from a proven testing process, a proven delivery process, to make sure that we're getting high quality user experiences, which is a culmination of all the things we've talked about, to your users, ready for a pilot, and then quickly ready to scale. So to do that, we've kind of developed an offering here, Coretek, that is the Nerdio production pilot, right? So we've got a very specific process. We do hold a Microsoft specialization in Azure Virtual Desktop. We are Nerdio uh, Platinum partners, and we've just been doing this for a really, really long time in the entire end user compute space throughout the history of our organization. And we've kind of taken all that and we've developed a best practices ABD reference design. We've got all of the templatation or the templates, the documentation, et cetera, to be able to uh, quickly come into an organization and define a design, define use cases, and be ready to put that out in a best practices way. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to deploy the Azure Virtual Desktop tenant with Nerdio. Um, use Nerdio to then make sure that we're having an Azure Files deployment for our FS Logics profiles, which we talked about earlier as being a heavily recommended part. We'll put out a single Windows 11 gallery image that could be multi-session, that could be single session. Again, that'll be based on your specific use case. Make sure that we're putting the applications in there, integrated with some of the unified library that Nerdio showed from SCCM or Intune or if you have WinGet for sure. Um, and then do really what we've always done and done very well, which is end-to-end functional testing of the workload. And that's where we, the technical organization, kind of look at it from an understanding of end user compute excellence and say, does this work? Does it function? Does it perform? Is there anything that we can see that's going to get in the user's way from having a fantastic initial experience with this solution? Are there any errors under the hood? Are all the applications and security integrations working appropriately? And have we accommodated for all of that? And then we'll support the user acceptance testing, right? That's where we get the actual app owners that understand the functionality of their particular applications in use, maybe beyond what we can reasonably have or have access to, as well as maybe some champions in the organization to be able to validate that workflow, right? We want to understand it A to Z, and we want to make sure that it's functioning because in a lot of cases, if you recall, we're not going to necessarily make persistent our first choice. There are times where that makes sense, but anything that we can find and remediate before we release this, because it's a one-to-many relationship often, uh, is a higher quality times X being the number of users we're going to deploy to. And then we want to pilot that and offer the go live support with the development engineer for up to 100 initial users, right? So that allows us to get a very, very meaningful sample size of a larger workload and a larger adoption where we can, again, prove everything out at a production volume and at a production um, level of scrutiny that's going to make the organization comfortable with the remaining risk of scaling and accelerate that so that you can make those timelines and those renegotiation points in other contracts you may have. And we're going to do it for $10,000, and that's starting, and that's net after we apply some Microsoft funding that is typically available, and that's based on some nominal workloads. Uh, but at the end of the day, that's not a huge investment for an organization to considerably remove risk from this change in platform, change in technology, and offsets quite a bit of risk to uh, you know doing the same. We also have options available if we do need a landing zone, and that's not something that you have today, and we need to get that there. As mentioned, we have a well-adopted framework for deploying those and deploying those quickly um, for AVD and beyond for your organization. We can bring in additional images, apps, workloads as we need to be able to validate those. And if we need to stick with you through an ongoing migration, those are things that Coretek offers to make sure that we're adopting the technology and more importantly, the people, your users, the lifeblood of your organization successfully as we migrate from those environments that we saw earlier, the small, medium, and large, and knowing that all of them take um, different levels of effort over different time periods. Um, so why would you want to work with Coretek? As I mentioned, we have the specialization required. We have the Nerdio partnership. We're an Azure expert MSP, of which there's, I believe, less than 100 globally, and we were among the first 5 out there. That is the highest um, ranking, if you will, or the highest possible certification you can get from a Microsoft Azure perspective. And underneath the hood, there are many, many certs by many, many, many of our people. covering a wide breadth and a few thousand hours a year of auditing, verifying our processes and our capabilities as well. And we've been doing this, as I mentioned, for a long time. 17 years is about how long our organization has been in existence, and we have been doing EUC throughout, right? Meaning, yes, there was some classic EUC in there throughout the days, and we have done that and done that successfully at enterprise levels. We've been a partner for Azure Virtual Desktop with Nerdio and directly with Microsoft as a Lighthouse pilot partner since its inception in late 2019. And as I mentioned, we have that Azure experience to understand the larger framework and to be able to call on resources to do the landing zones or additional lift and shift should we need to support applications, app modernization strategies, and the like. So with that, I will thank you all for joining and open it up to questions and answers.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. Want anything to add before we sign off here this morning?
No, I guess we did a good job if there's no questions.
Great. All right. Well, thank you to our audience for your time this morning, and look forward to seeing you soon. And again, just reach out to Coretek or Nerdio in regards to the offer should you find it appealing, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Bye-bye.